A sloper, or the full body hold, is what we'll be talking about today. Step 1 to getting stronger at them is that it always starts with training. Training comes in many different forms, but there's really no way around it. You release some energy, you build up that storage, and then you repeat the process. The only difference we can make is our approach around it and sort of how effectively we do things. I've done quite a few years of training to get to the point where I'm at today, and every year I've seen improvements, but I've also seen the abundance of mistakes that I've made along the way. So just bear in mind that in this video I'll be sharing some of my thoughts and reflections. I'm sure there's lots more on this subject to be said, and if you have anything to add, then please feel free to do so in the comment section. Really, any and all ideas, they are always welcome. Anyhow, without further ado, in today's video, I figured I'd share some of the insights I've made about sloper training, and why back in 2018, Mr. Nikken started referring to me as Sloper Daddy, a name which has stuck with me ever since. And while I'm not the literal daddy of slopers, I am quite the connoisseur of them, and I certainly prefer a sloper to many other hold types. In the past, I've released a few party tricks videos of me hanging, swinging and pulling on the Beastmaker 2000 45-degree sloper. This has led to many questions about how, what, and a few whys. The whys are quite simple. It's fun and it's good training. But for the how and the what, we'll have to dive in a little bit deeper and explore the depths of my favorite type of hold, the juicy slippery slopes. Firstly, let's start with the basics of grabbing a sloping hold. So friction is the key component, and the idea is that you want to increase it as much as you possibly can. If you're strictly hanging from a sloper without the components that are your feet, you initiate by engaging your fingers and primarily your wrist. It's almost like you're trying to create friction by slightly rotating the wrist inwards. Further down the chain, your elbows come into play. These should also be engaged and rotating inwards, creating a form of compression which increases the rotation and therefore the friction you can achieve on your hands. Lastly, your shoulders should be engaged and pushed backwards, and your lats used to help with rotating your elbows. Secondly, it can seem a bit crazy to some when somebody familiar with holding slopers does something on them. How does your wrist not break is a question I've received many times throughout the years, and the answer is quite simple. It's conditioning, training, and then repeat. I didn't just pop out into this world ready for slopers. There was quite a few steps I needed to take along the way. In fact, I climbed with taped up wrists for the first few years of my climbing because I constantly injured them, and this helped me stabilize them. After a while I started doing wrist curls, which also helped relieve this tension quite a bit, and I kept doing all kinds of wrist strengthening exercises after that. A thing I do would be to watch TV series and then just lift a saucepan up and down in different variations to strengthen my wrists. And personally, I've also found that using a rotating bar can be quite helpful for strengthening my wrists, as long as it's done in moderation. What I'm saying is that if you find ways to strengthen each section you use when climbing on slopers individually, then you can combine them on the wall to just get stronger at climbing on slopers. Thirdly, a very important part of grabbing any sloper is learning how to tense your fingers. Basically, you'll want to even out the force as much as you possibly can throughout your hands, and a little trick to help you understand this that you can try at home is you put your fingers on the table. Start off by trying to create as much force as you can through your fingertips as you would on a crimp. Now slide the hand towards you and see how that feels. Now do the exact same thing, but apply as much pressure as you can everywhere on your hand instead, and then slide it towards yourself again. You'll notice that you get much more friction and force from the evenly distributed load, which is essentially the same thing as you'll want to do on the wall. Admittedly, there are slopes that aren't quite as simple to understand as the Beastmaker 2000, and so to help you better understand this concept, I figured we could break down the slopers on the Big Island, one of my projects which some would say has a few slopers on it. Now at first glance, this boulder seems like a pure compression sloper test piece. And there's a lot of compression on it, but it's not a pure sloper test piece. As you can see by my hand markings down there, I've shown what the distribution of force is along my fingers on each type of hold. And already here, we're only using about half of my hand. I'm not really distributing all the force as I would if I were to optimize it on a sloper. Because these holds aren't pure slopers, like most slopers that you encounter in the gym or on the rock are. So the thing that you work with is trying to distribute this force as evenly as possible throughout your hand to get as much friction as possible. Because not every sloper is just a pure cookie cutter revival sloper, the one that I've had here and there. So you have to really consider how each single hold affects your skin and affects your friction, and then distribute it amongst your hand as well as you can. Like, apply the pressure where it feels like it's actually possible. So even here at the top, it seems like I'm holding two slopers that are just pure slopers, but the right hand is actually a half crimp for my back 3 fingers. And the thing I bump it into only has a slopey section, a frictionful section on the lower part of the hand, while the upper side is where I'm putting most of the force, which is more of an open-handed grip than a sloper really. The only real pure sloper on this entire boulder is this last hole that I'm jumping to right now. There I get my entire hand on it and friction is just put across everything. And there I apply an even pressure throughout my hand, and that makes the hold good. So what I'm trying to say with this is that slopers are a bit ambiguous usually, and you have to really figure out how they work on each individual hold. Furthermore, here's a comparison between how my body looks when engaged on a sloper compared to a crimped position. If you look at how I initiate the hang on the sloper, a lot of it comes from engaging muscles that are not related to my fingers, such as my shoulders, lats and core. This is in order to stop a potential swing, as even a very, very tiny one can pull you straight off the wall. So in comparison, a crimp is much more situated around having the right connections in your forearms rather than being a full body type of hold. It can become a bit easier to hang off a crimp by engaging your shoulders, lats and so forth, but it is far from as essential for the actual lift up from the ground. So the takeaway from this is that different grip types don't just affect how your forearms are engaged, instead it's your entire body that is affected by varying your grip. And what I wanted to showcase with this is that slopers and crimps are very different, with more components than just the ones that are the fibers in your forearms. Now, one more thing that I want to mention about slopers is that we've mainly been going through how I engage myself when campusing or hanging on slopers, but on the wall it becomes slightly different. So let's take a look at my position here. My lats aren't very engaged, nor are my elbows. And that's because in this particular move, I instead focus on keeping my body close to the wall using a toe hook. And this allows me to basically alter the angle of the sloper, making it a lot better than if my body was further out from the wall. Generally, this is something that you do when climbing, but you just alter things with your feet. And the better you get the angle of the sloper, the more friction you're going to get on it as well. And now to finish things off, I figured we could break down some more slopey boulders that I've done in the past, or tried in the past, and just see how the things that I mentioned in this video are applied into actual climbing. The first boulder we're going to take a look at is from a couple of videos ago, where I was jumping to a pretty trashy sloper. And the thing that I do to deal with the force that's coming out is I tense my lat as heavily as I can. Let's take a look at that again. When I jump to it, I tense my lat to reduce the swing as much as possible, and this makes me not fall off the sloper. The thing is, if I were to go further away, the grip strength would be the same. I wouldn't require more grip strength to hold on to it, but since the swing is so big, I would just fall right off. Next up, we're going to take a look at a dyno that I did from a couple of videos ago called Schusslinie, or something like that. Regardless, the boulder is essentially just a one mover to a sloper that you catch. And the thing is, in order to deal with the swing and deal with the momentum, you engage your lat right off the bat, the same as the previous boulder. Take a look at it again. When I jump, the first thing that happens is that everything in my back is completely tensed. If I were to be slower with this engagement, I wouldn't be able to hang on to it. I would just slide off the sloper instead. So again, we're not focusing on grip strength purely. We're focusing on the full body experience and using your entire body for a climb. Lastly, I figured we could break down this boulder called Archoxia that I also did in a couple of videos ago. A compression slopey test piece 8A plus in Västervik. So if you take a look what happens immediately in this first move is that I land on the hold and I quickly engage my back to stay close to the wall and essentially lean in towards the left hand side in order to get more leverage of the sloper. I then quickly move on to the next sloper, and there I engage my back to be able to create tension of my foot. I get a toe hook to help again, get that angle on the sloper well, so that I don't have to, I don't risk sliding off it. After that, there's a couple of more tension-y crimp moves that aren't, well, they're not so much on slopers, but I do a dyno to a sloper at the very end, and if you look at how my arm is engaged when I hit it, it's a complete lock-off with the back, because if I try and hold it slower, I will definitely slide off. So yeah, hopefully it became somewhat apparent that slopers aren't purely about having the right type of grip strength, and it's more about understanding how each individual hold is supposed to be held, and then engaging your back and your entire upper body to help provide the support that you need to stick on to it. If you like this video and you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe, and if you have any comments, then drop them in the section down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, folks.